Hi, everyone, and welcome to our monthly office hours. This month, we are focusing on seizures, safety, and transportation, and learning what to do in certain situations. In a little bit, I will introduce our speaker, but first, I wanted to run through a few basic notes for everyone. Everyone here should remain muted. We will take questions at the end, so you can either submit those through the chat feature, and myself or Chelsea Beednell will be monitoring that. However, this session, like all of our others, are being recorded. All materials we can provide afterward, including the recording and everything else that's provided on our website. But that once those are available, you'll see another announcement come out from us to notify. We do have closed captioning available. You can either choose that on your screen and follow along there. We do have a captioner available for this session as well. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions, let Chelsea know and she can assist. As mentioned, you can use the Q&A. We will wait till the end of our session to have that discussion. We should have about 15 minutes at the end of today's session to talk through some of those questions that you do have. Just a little bit about NADTC. We are the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. We are a federally recognized technical assistance center funded through an agreement with Easter Seals, US Aging, and the Federal Transit Administration. As a center, our major objectives are to provide technical assistance, or TA is what we call it, and training. So the training piece is what you're seeing today. We do also have publications that we put out quite often, as well as develop different resources for the aging and disability communities in terms of access to safe and reliable, accessible transportation. We do quite a bit of coordination and partnership across the country, not just with national organizations, but talking and coordinating with others in the field of transportation or aging and disability. We also provide community grants and do coalition work. So if you have any questions on that, we can put the link in the chat. The community grants we do offer annually. So that grant cycle just passed and we awarded some grantees through that. So next year will be your next opportunity for those grants. And lastly, through most of what I've been talking about already, our mission is to promote the availability of accessible transportation options that serve the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers in the communities that they live in. And then moving right along to our presentation today, we are welcoming Roxanne Cogil with the Epilepsy Foundation. She is the Executive Director and Regional Teams Director for multiple states throughout the country. And today she'll be talking about Seizure First Aid Ready training. And if you registered ahead of time, you should have gotten a message from us that today's session is eligible for certification. And so that link was in the message that we sent out last week, but we can certainly provide that for you and direct you to Epilepsy Foundation's learning portal for more information. And so with all of that information, I will turn it over to Roxanne and she will lead us in today's discussion.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Jeremy. My name is Roxanne Cogil, and I'm Executive Director for the regional teams for the states of Iowa, Arkansas, and Oklahoma for the Epilepsy Foundation. I've been employed by the Epilepsy Foundation between 10 and 11 years. And I got involved with the foundation through the journey of our daughter in her epilepsy. She was diagnosed at the age of 2 with multiple types of seizures, intractable epilepsy, which resulted in 2 epilepsy brain surgeries, including a hemispherectomy brain surgery in 2009. She is now 18 years old and doing well and remains on seizure medication. So the Epilepsy Foundation provides support and services to individuals and families living across the country. We do cover all states across the country and you can find the local representative for your state by going to epilepsy.com and searching for a local office, and you can search by state. We have a lot of seizure education programs available on demand on our learning management system of learn.epilepsy.com. And this program today is the Seizure First Aid Ready program. It's a shortened program of our Seizure First Aid certification program. Both programs are available pre-recorded on demand at learn.epilepsy.com. And I hope everybody took the pre-assessment. And if you haven't, I believe Jeremy said that they sent out the link last week. And if you haven't, I do believe you can take the post-assessment, which will be posted at the end of the training. Our program today is funded. It is funded with support from other organizations, including the Center for Disease Control. So we do appreciate the demographic and information in completing the online pre and post assessment. So today's curriculum has to do with, we're going to educate on how to recognize the 4 most common kinds of seizures, be able to identify the correct and incorrect steps for helping somebody if you were to witness them in a seizure, and to identify when you should call emergency services in the event of a seizure. And please, I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box at any time throughout the program. So we're going to start off by showing a video clip.
Michael has epilepsy, and he is having a seizure. Would you know how to help him?
Stay calm, it's gonna be fine. Help me get him on his side. That's it.
Visit epilepsy.com to see what happened to Michael and learn seizure first aid.
Many people are very fearful when they witness a seizure, a visible seizure, especially out in public, or perhaps are waiting at the bus stop or riding transportation. And it can be very fearful. Many times people tell us they want to help, but they end up standing there and watching because they don't really know what to do to help that person. So we're hoping to alleviate that fear today. So it's important for everyone, everywhere to know basic seizure first aid. And that's because anyone, anywhere, at any time can have a seizure. When we look at the statistics, 1 in 10 people will have a seizure in their lifetime. It's a lot more common than what people realize. And different states have different driving regulations for driving. For example, in the state of Iowa, people need to be completely seizure-free for 6 months in order to obtain or maintain their driver's license. And if they have 1 breakthrough seizure, then they cannot drive for another 6 months. And the Epilepsy Foundation, we have a state database at epilepsy.com for the driving databases. So you can look up your state to see what the driving restrictions are. But many times when people cannot drive, they first and foremost turn to family and friends seeking for rides to their medical appointments, out into the community to get groceries or to work or whatever. But what we find is a lot of people that have a seizure or seizures, they get tired of asking for rides. And so it's very important that we connect into public transit, private transit, and all potential transportation options. So if you're a public or private transit provider or rideshare provider on this call, there's usually a lot of people that take advantage of those services because they can't drive themselves. Unfortunately, there's a lot of myths surrounding people with seizures and epilepsy. And so we like to clear that up right away. It's important for you to know that most seizures are not medical emergencies. Seizures have different levels of consciousness. Some people are fully conscious during a seizure. Other people have impaired consciousness, yet others have fully lost all of their consciousness. And it's also important to know if you transport somebody or you work with somebody, such as in social services, that has seizures or epilepsy, that they've disclosed, if they've disclosed that to you, then it's really a good idea to know what their typical pattern is, because there's different kinds of seizures, as we talked about, but there's also different levels of control. Some people's seizures are completely controlled, yet others are controlled during the daytime, but not during sleep. And if they fall asleep during that transportation, they could be at potential risk for having a seizure. That's just another example. Some seizures are not contagious. If youth or children witness visible seizures, sometimes they think they can catch it from others. And so it's really important to educate children as well. Some of you may recall they used to teach back in the day to put an object in somebody's mouth during a seizure. That's because they thought that people would swallow their tongues. But the medical professionals say the tongue is a very strong organ in the mouth and it's physically impossible to swallow. So while somebody may bite their tongue during a seizure, it's physically impossible to swallow it. Epilepsy is now classified as a chronic medical disease by the Center for Disease Control. It is not a mental health. It is not a mental health condition. It's a medical condition. Asthma, diabetes, allergies are examples of other chronic medical conditions, and so is epilepsy. A person can die from a seizure, although it's not that common. Sometimes it's the environment and circumstances where that seizure occurs, such as if they happen to be walking up and down steps, they could fall and injure themselves. Or sometimes people have difficulty breathing during or after a seizure. Or somebody could drown in a bathtub or in a swimming pool if they have a seizure underwater. Sometimes seizures go on and on and on longer than what they typically last, which could result in a risk for injury. There are definite situations that are medical emergencies with seizures, and we're going to get to that later on in these slides. And when we look at the most common cause of death in epilepsy, it's called SUDEP. Many people are familiar with the term SIDS for infant death, but SUDEP stands for sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And the researchers and scientists really don't know what caused it. They just know sometimes in some people that have seizures, especially convulsive seizures, during sleep, sometimes they pass away after that seizure ends. And so the biggest way we can prevent SUDEP is by controlling the seizures, being preventative.
The human brain is a complex and dynamic organ. The brain contains billions of cells, nerve cells that talk to each other by sending and receiving electronic impulses. Electrical activity in the brain is usually carefully balanced. A seizure occurs when there is a temporary change in the way the brain sends electrical signals. You can think of a seizure as a short circuit or electrical storm in the brain, affecting the way messages are sent. This interrupts normal brain function. It is important to know that every brain has the potential to have a seizure. Every one of us could experience a seizure under certain circumstances.
Some seizures or events do not have changes in the brain's electrical activity when they occur. They are typically symptoms of other physical or psychological problems or concerns. These are known by different names. They are associated with psychological concerns. They may be called PNES, psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. Regardless of the names, The basics of seizure first aid that you will learn during this course should be followed with any event, especially keeping the person safe.
For most people, when they hear the word seizure, it conjures up an image of a person who has collapsed and is unaware of their surroundings, on the ground, with shaky and jerky movements. This is the way seizures are often portrayed in our media, in films, or on television. But it is not the way all seizures look. Seizures can present many different ways. The outward appearance of a seizure depends on the area of the brain that is involved in the seizure. Seizures can result in a change of movement, sensation, behavior, speech, or a person's level of awareness.
So there are many different kinds of seizures that present itself
For most people,
in different ways. So now that we've looked at the information about seizures, now we're going to talk about what epilepsy is. Epilepsy is diagnosed when a person has 2 or more unprovoked seizures or one unprovoked seizure and the likelihood to have more. What physicians are looking for is that repetitive pattern of symptoms, of the symptoms occurring over and over and over. Unlike somebody that has a one-time seizure. For example, somebody could have a one-time seizure. Let's say that somebody has diabetes and they have major changes in their blood sugar. That could provoke a diabetic seizure. So that is not epilepsy because it's provoked and related to that other health condition. When we look at the rate of epilepsy, the statistics say that it's 1 in 26 people across the country will be diagnosed with epilepsy by the time they reach their elderly years. That's about 1 person in every classroom. It's a lot more common than what people realize.
With epilepsy in their lifetime.
So now we're going to look at seizure recognition. So what we're going to do is cover how to recognize the 4 most common kinds of seizures. And this is very important for people in your profession because most seizures do not involve convulsions, and the signs can be very subtle and difficult to recognize. So I'm going to show a couple video clips of a couple types of focal seizures where the signs are very subtle and difficult to recognize. Notice the eye blinking movement. The gentleman's head is turned to the side. He is staring. It looks like somebody is with him, but nobody is responding or helping him. That is one example. So take a look at this other video clip.
Excuse me, sir, come on up and I'll ring you out. Come on, buddy, we're out of here at 5 on Sundays.
In that video clip, the person was standing upright. He was swaying back and forth on his feet. He was staring. He had chewing motions and lip smacking with his mouth. He had repetitive tapping movements on his bottle that he was holding in his hand. And the attendant was calling out to him at the front of the store, only he was not able to respond with answers to his questions. That is another example of what a focal seizure may potentially look like. So things to look for to see if somebody happens to be or is suspected of being in a seizure. What did you see or hear first? Was the person able to tell you if they didn't feel well? So sometimes there are early warning signs prior to somebody having a seizure, and sometimes that person may be able to express those to you. If they can, then you could help get them to a safe place in case a bigger seizure were to hit. Not everybody has an early warning sign, and in many people, sometimes the seizures come on with little or no warning at all. When observing a seizure, it's important to write down what happened next. Was the person conscious or did they have impaired conscious? Was part of the face or body involved, or just on both sides of the body? And did you notice any changes with their speech, awareness, or behavior during the event? And then physicians really like it when bystanders time the seizure. And the recovery time varies from person to person. Sometimes people recover right away and then go back to doing whatever activity it was they were doing. Other times people need to rest for a few minutes, or even to sleep for an hour or two before they are fully recovered after the seizure. And so if you're working with that client or consumer or that writer, and they disclose that to you, then it's a really good idea to know what a typical pattern is for them. So the first kind of seizure we're going to talk about is the focal aware seizure. On the old International Against League with Epilepsy, they had a classification system, an ICD-9 coding system, and now they've transferred over to the ICD-10 medical coding. And so now it's called focal aware seizure, but it used to be called simple partial seizure. These terminology is interchanged and they mean the same thing. Focal means that the seizure starts from a specific focal area of the brain and the person is fully alert and aware. So this person is fully conscious, they can walk and talk during the seizure. And the signs can be very subtle. Many times it looks like the person is faking it because they're telling people that they have a seizure, only it doesn't look like your typical type of seizure. In some individuals, it could look like odd rhythmic jerking or twitching of the face or their limbs. In other individuals, they describe sensory symptoms where they may have a tingling feeling in their leg, for example, only they weren't sitting on the ground with their legs crossed. Or they're describing certain noises and you don't hear the ringing noises or those type of noises in your environment. Or they're describing smells that don't exist in their environment, such as skunk or burnt toast or something burning. Or visual changes. Sometimes they see a change with their vision where they describe seeing colors of a rainbow, or their vision goes funny for a minute or two, then their vision comes back. With other individuals, the symptoms of this type of epileptic seizure portrays itself with psychic symptoms where they may be describing hallucinations or deja vu or a sudden feeling of fear or anxiety, only nothing in their environment is precipitating that. So sometimes this event can be confused with psychosomatic illness, or it could look like that person's in a mystical experience or even illicit drug use. But typically this seizure on average will last a minute or two and it'll end on its own. And because they're fully conscious, many times there's not much for recovery time except for reassuring the person. If a proper diagnosis gets made for this person, there's treatment such as certain kinds of seizure medication that can help manage this. And because these symptoms are very subtle, they may look like other medical conditions. Many times the neurologist is looking at the brainwave data. So when they put the electrodes on the head called a video EEG, and they have these symptoms while they're hooked up to the electrodes, many times they can tell by looking at that data to see if it's this type of epileptic seizure or not. Another common kind of epileptic seizure is the focal impaired awareness seizure. This used to be called complex partial seizure, and they mean the same thing. With this one, the seizure originates from a specific focal area of the brain, and the person has impaired awareness. This one is commonly known as the wandering seizure because that's what it looks like. The person is able to retain mobility, but they can't respond to questions, just like in that second video clip that I just showed. So with this one, it often begins with the person staring off with a blank dazed stare. They're not aware of their surroundings. They are confused. They're disoriented. Their movements are very clumsy. They tend to wander around with no sense of purpose or direction. They have a lot of repeated purposeless movements. That person often starts fidgeting, and they have a sense of restlessness or anxiety. And you're kind of looking at them thinking, what's going on with that person? They don't look like they're with it, but yet they appear to be. And because they can't talk many times during the seizure, or if they're trying to talk, their speech sometimes may be slurred. And if somebody were to come up to them when they're in this impaired conscious state, say to touch their shoulder or force them to sit down, many times it's a natural reaction when they're in this state to push back, fend off, and get aggressive. They could become combative and they don't know what's going on when they're in this type of seizure. You got somebody, think about it in our adult population. They're walking down the street, say they're walking towards that bus stop. They're confused, disoriented, with no sense of purpose of direction. People, bystanders are trying to talk to them, only they're not responding, or their speech may be slurred, and they're fending off and getting aggressive. Sometimes what it looks like to the bystanders, the community, is it looks like substance use with alcohol or drug use. Because unfortunately, that's what it sometimes looks like. Or it could look like aggressive behavior or mental health challenges. Many times when bystanders witness somebody in this type of seizure and they don't know them, they call law enforcement because it looks like something else is going on. Typically, this type of seizure will last 1 to 3 minutes, run through its course, and end on its own in that average length of time. So here is another video clip of what a focal seizure may potentially look like.
I have epilepsy, and I'd like to share my seizure with you. I want you to see it so that you won't be afraid. When you have epilepsy, you ask yourself, when will the seizure happen? Who will see? Am I still me? But I'd rather ask you, would you know how to help me when it happens? Do you know there are different seizures and that they look very different? Could you have epilepsy and not know it? There are many questions. Find answers at epilepsy.com.
And you can watch that video at epilepsy.com as well.
I have epilepsy.
So now that we've talked about the 2 most common kinds of focal seizures, we're going to discuss how to recognize the 2 most common kinds of generalized seizures. So a focal seizure is where a seizure originates from a specific focal area of the brain and the rest of the brain is unaffected. But the generalized seizure is where that seizure starts from both sides of the brain. So this is a common one called the absence, or it's also pronounced absent seizure. This used to be called petit mal seizure. They mean the same thing. It gets its name because these are commonly known as those quick staring spells. Are they or aren't they? Because staring means a lot of different things. But when somebody stares off with the blank stare, you see the absence of the person. And so because both sides of the brain is involved with the seizure, many times the first thing that happens is the person will stop what they're doing and they'll stare off. They do have a brief lapse of awareness and they appear to be absent for a moment in time. Usually on average, this staring seizure will last less than 20 seconds. Sometimes, but not always, they could have blinking motion with their eyes or rapid chewing motions with their mouth. And because staring can mean a lot of different things, it could appear to be confused or daydreaming. Many people confuse this with a person daydreaming, or in children, they get a misdiagnosis sometimes with attention deficit disorder when actually it's this undiagnosed epileptic seizure. And again, for this type of seizure, because the symptoms of staring can mean so many different things, the neurologist, which is a specialist for people that for seizure workup, are very interested in that brainwave data on that video EEG because they're looking for a very specific type of brainwave data for this type of seizure. And people who have this type of seizure often have 50 to 100 to 100 of these seizures a day. And when they're in this brief staring seizure, they don't remember a thing. And so think about this one, kind of like a light switch going on and off. That person is in and out, in and out. They're missing snippets of instruction and gaps of time, and they have no idea that they're missing pieces of their entire day. And so a lot of times physicians will say, you know, people report, well, so-and-so, you know, our loved one had a staring, they have staring spells, but we don't know if it's a seizure or not. Usually the first thing the neurologists say is, could they be aroused? If you were to snap your finger or to touch their arm, they're not going to be able to respond to that touch or stimuli if they were truly in a staring seizure. Now, if they could respond to that touch or stimuli, then many times it's an indication that that person potentially could have been daydreaming. So here's a brief video clip of what a generalized absent seizure may potentially look like. You can see her rocking back and forth. There's some eye blinking movements. There's some staring. A very brief episode, and they usually happen pretty quick. So the other kind of generalized seizure is called the tonic clonic seizure. This used to be called grand mal seizure, which is really old medical terminology and not really used by the medical community anymore. Both sides of the brain is involved. Tonic means stiff and clonic means jerk. Because the diaphragm contracts at the onset of this event, many times there's a loud piercing cry. The person does lose complete consciousness and they will drop to the ground. So if they're sitting on that public transit bus, they could hit their head on that forward of that seat, or they could fall out of their seat into the aisle of that bus. And many times there's no warning when this occurs, but their whole body gets very rigid and stiff, upper extremity, lower extremity, and bilateral. And it's followed by that clonic phase where the whole body going into rhythmic jerking. And this can be pretty intense and very difficult to witness. It's common symptoms for this type of seizure where there's shallow breathing, where that person will have a lot of saliva and drool coming out of the mouth, a lot of gasping for air, very labored breathing. Sometimes people foam at the mouth as well. In some people, they lose bowel or bladder control, when normally this wouldn't occur. A lot of our adult population that call in to us across the country that live on their own, they don't have any recollection whatsoever that they have this type of seizure. They just know that their pants are soiled or their bed is wet, and those things typically don't occur. Sometimes there is cyanosis associated with a seizure where the skin, lips, and nail beds will turn a very darkish, bluish, purplish color. But the person's color should return to normal when the seizure ends. Typically, this type of seizure will last 1 to 3 minutes, run through its course, and end on its own in that average length of time, which is why it's very important to time the seizure, because when people don't time the seizure, they often reporting it lasting 10, 15, 20 minutes because it seemed like it lasted that long. And when you time this type of seizure, you don't time the recovery or the postictal phase. So when the person's opening their eyes, they're coming back to it, it's now the start of the postictal stage. And it's very common for many people to be confused, disoriented. They may have a headache. Their muscles and body are sore and tired. They may have bitten their tongue. There could be some blood coming out of the mouth from biting their tongue. And they could have difficulty talking right away after that seizure, or if they're trying to get up off the ground, a lot of times their limbs are very weak. And so it's important to give them some space and explain to them what had happened. So here's a video clip of what a tonic-clonic seizure may potentially look like.
We'll watch a video from a man with epilepsy named Kevin who generously shared this footage of his seizures so that you can learn what seizures look like in real life. Here, he is being observed in the hospital in an epilepsy monitoring unit, or EMU. Brain monitoring can capture the patterns and location of seizure activity in his brain and help determine the best treatment for his epilepsy.
It's been pushed. Just in case. I'm going to push it again, okay? Because he pushed it earlier. Probably so. It's coming out. It's coming out. Can you read this? I don't think so, because it's been coming out.
It's already out.
It's already out.
Already out.
Give it to me again. Yeah, give me a pen.
So very difficult to witness these type of seizures. And you can see that the electrodes were placed on his head. He was on an epilepsy monitoring unit and his seizures were being monitored and the data captured during that seizure. But we show that video because that's the reality of this condition is the different types of seizures, especially the tonic, clonic, and the seriousness that it could potentially be.
We'll watch a video.
So we've talked about the two most common kinds of focal seizures, the kind where people can walk and talk and the kind where people can walk but not talk, as well as the two most common kinds of generalized seizures, the staring seizures, as well as this most recent tonic clonic where they have convulsions. So now we're going to talk about what you can do to help in basic seizure first aid. So the Epilepsy Foundation streamlined their protocol a couple years ago to make it easier for the general public to remember. And it's called the Stay Safe Side Protocol. And time the seizure. The general rule of thumb, according to the medical professionals, is 5 minutes. If that seizure is still going strong at the 5-minute mark, then it may be a potential emergency situation. And that's because, as we have already discussed, most seizures run through its course and end on its own in just a few minutes. And when it hits that 5-minute mark, there may need to be other types of intervention or medication administered to help stop that lengthy seizure. So if you were to witness somebody having a seizure, it's very important to stay with the person until they are awake and alert. You want to time the seizure. You want to remain calm. So generally, you don't want to yell seizure, seizure, and create unnecessary chaos in the environment. If it's somebody you don't know in the community, you could check to see if they have a medical ID on them. And if it's somebody you don't know, see if there's a familiar person with them, because if they have an SCL or respite provider or a caregiver with them, then you can ask them what you can do to help. And chances are, if they're with them, they're going to know what type of condition and what you can do to help. The next thing you can do is keep the person safe. You want to move or guide them away from harm. So for example, if somebody was in that wandering seizure, that focal impaired seizure, you would want to gently guide them away from the stairs on that bus. You want to guide them away from the traffic on the street or away from that brick wall of the building. If the person collapsed to the ground in a tonic-clonic seizure, for example, you would want to move other objects and items out of the way. You want their limbs to jerk and shake freely so no potential harm or fractures come to that person. If the person is not awake and aware, it's ideal to turn the person on their side. And that's because if you were to leave the person on their back when they're not awake and aware, all that saliva and drool could go back on their throat and they're at potential risk for aspirating on that fluid. So the medical professionals recommend turning the person on their side during their seizure, and it helps keep the airway clear. It allows the saliva and drool to drain out of the side of their mouth. And the tongue hangs out of the mouth too, so it doesn't block that airway. You want to loosen the tight clothes around the neckline, the zipper, the snaps, the tie around the person's neckline. You want to remove the glasses. If you can put something small or soft under the head, that's very helpful. You're probably not going to have a pillow nearby, but there could be a coat, there could be a sweatshirt, there could be a bag to put under their head to help keep it from hitting that hard concrete or surface. So because seizures can happen at anywhere at any time, you want to pay extra attention to safety, especially around transportation. You want to gently guide the person away from danger. Don't restrain them unless absolutely necessary. And this is to prevent injury. If that person is about to fall or they are unconscious, you want to lie them down if possible, but you don't want to pry them out of their seat, for example. But if they were to fall on the floor of that bus, you could turn them on their side in the aisle of that bus, for example. Or if they have a seizure that they're not awake and aware on that bus seat, you could turn them on their side, make sure their face is away from the back of the bus seat, because it helps keep their airway clear. If they're riding in, say that person is riding in a minivan or that type of transportation, you could turn the seat back and turn them on their side in that type of vehicle, but never ever leave the person alone. And simple basic seizure first aid may be all that is needed. And definitely call for help if the person is alone or they are not recovering after that seizure. Things not to do during a seizure: never ever restrain or hold the person down. That's not going to make the seizure end. The majority of the seizures will run through its course and end on its own in just a few minutes. Never ever put an object in somebody's mouth during a seizure. They could chip a tooth, they could break a jaw, they could break off a broken piece and potentially swallow it, and a lot of harm could come to that individual. Never ever give the person food or water until they're able to swallow and they are awake. The one exception to this rule is if a treating healthcare provider prescribes a medication to be administered in the mouth or the cheek of somebody to help stop a lengthy seizure, but that would be prescribed for a specific person during a specific circumstance for a specific seizure type. It's a good idea for everybody to have a seizure action plan, and we at the Epilepsy Foundation have seizure action plan templates, and these are put together in conjunction with that person or their legal guardian with the treating healthcare provider. In most cases is a neurologist or a neurologist who is board certified in epilepsy and epileptologist. And this is very helpful. It lists the kinds of seizures, how frequent they occur, if there's any special seizure first aid that's needed for that person, and if there's treatment protocols in case they were to have a lengthy seizure.
One of the most important parts of caring for a person with seizures is to make sure that you don't put anything in their mouth. One of the biggest misconceptions about seizures is that a person having a seizure would swallow their tongue, and that's simply not true. You shouldn't put anything in the mouth of a person having a seizure until they're awake and they are able to swallow. The one instance where it might be okay to put something in the mouth is if they have a rescue medication that has been prescribed by their medical team to be given to in the mouth to stop their seizures. We don't want to restrain a person when they're having a seizure, so don't hold them down. If they are walking around, you don't need to hold on to them unless they're walking into a dangerous situation, in which case you want to redirect them away from that situation. What's most important here is that we're not trying to make the situation any worse. And sometimes when seizures are over, people can become somewhat aggressive or combative. And for these reasons, we don't want to restrain them or hold them. One of the most
situations that are definite medical emergencies. So if a person has a co-medical condition, such as diabetes, or they're pregnant, emergency services is often warranted so a medical evaluation can be done. If a person does not return to their usual state after they've recovered from that seizure, it is a definite medical emergency. Or if it's the very first time somebody had a seizure or no known history is known. Sometimes the seizures do last longer than that 5 minutes, or they have clusters of seizures where they have seizure after seizure and they're not regaining consciousness in between, is often considered an emergency situation. And because sometimes seizures can often come on with little or no warning, the person may get injured, such as suffered a hard hit to the head. They could have suffered a concussion or a fracture to their limb. Or after they've recovered from the seizure, they're still having difficulty breathing after that seizure ends. Anytime a seizure occurs in water is an emergent situation. Even if they didn't go under the water, they could have gotten water in their lungs and aspirate on that fluid, and that's something we don't want to find out about later. So if you were to witness somebody having a seizure, it's really important to share what you observed to the appropriate parent or legal guardian so they can relay that to their treating healthcare provider. You want to be calm. You want to continue staying with a person until they're awake and alert, and offer to call a friend or family member if needed. And again, if they have somebody familiar with them, just ask that person on what you can do to help. Ensure that they have safe transportation. Many times people, after they have a seizure, that when they come to, they don't want to be transported to the emergency room, especially if it's a typical type of seizure that they have, because they get stuck with that ambulance bill. But they may not have safe transportation, or if they took public transit, it may not be safe for them to ride public transit back home because they're still confused and disoriented and could be for a period of time. And if emergency services were called, give as much detail as possible about what happened so they know how to properly care and properly care and treat that person. So with that, Jeremy, that is the end of our presentation. So is there any questions in the chat box?
Yeah, thank you so much, Roxanne. We did have one. What is the best way to screen for any sort of epilepsy without violating protected health information of the writer or client when trying to develop some sort of action plan for your agency?
Oh, that's a really good question, and a tough question as well, because it's all about disclosure, right? So it's hard for screening because there's so many different signs and symptoms, and there's so many different kinds of seizures that can present in different ways. Many times when people are writing, well, if they have, say they're on one of the HCBS waivers, the Home and Community-Based Services waivers, and they have transportation through that, many times that is disclosed to the transit agency or transportation driver because of the funding in those services. Other times, I know a lot of my adults that live on their own, that take public transit, that fall through the gaps of the system. Sometimes they've told me that when they have the same bus driver, that they share that with the bus driver. But many times people with epilepsy are completely controlled with their seizures. So that's a very tough question. And I don't know if you have anything to recommend on that, Jeremy, as far as that.
No, I think you hit it pretty well. If it's a frequent writer, the driver will certainly know. There was a suggestion in the chat box, having a conversation like, are there any medical conditions we should be aware of? Something like that. In public transit, we're not always taking a lot of information. If it's demand response, we may know where they live and your phone number, their name, and that's about it, unless there's additional information. So it's really hard to answer that from a public transit perspective, because a lot of times it may be on a fixed route where we don't even know that person's name. The driver may recognize them, but we don't know a lot of information.
And if you can't even ask, if about medical conditions, maybe you could just ask something even more general, such as, please let us know if there's anything we can do to help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do have one more. What is the best way to screen focal seizures? What happens if they go untreated?
Oh, that's a very good question. And that is so hard, because screening focal seizures, as you can see that we covered, the signs are very subtle and difficult to recognize. They look like other conditions. So I will share with you the general protocol when somebody suspects symptoms or episodes or spells and they don't know if they're seizures or not. So we recommend, as an Epilepsy Foundation, getting in to see a neurologist, and that way they'll do basic seizure diagnostic workup, which often includes a 1 to 2 hour video EEG. They'll do a brain imaging with an MRI or CT scan, draw blood work, gather family history. Then they'll take all that data to help determine if they think it's an epilepsy diagnosis or not. So get in to see a neurologist for basic diagnostic workup.
This one is for myself. What's the best way as a transit agency? What's the best way to become involved or bring that awareness to all of your drivers?
Well, one thing is if you have an email or e-news system electronically, you could get them information about learn.epilepsy.com, which is available to the general public at no cost, many seizure education programs. And also the #1 resource in the world is the National Epilepsy Foundation website of epilepsy.com. You can search for anything and everything that you need on there regarding any types of seizures, epilepsy, physicians, comprehensive epilepsy centers in the country, anything you want to know. And we do have an epilepsy and seizure helpline of 1-800-332-1000, where people could submit general information requests online or speak with somebody live 24/7, 7 days a week.
Would you mind typing that into the chat for
Sure.
us? That'd be great.
And the month of November is National Epilepsy Awareness Month. So there's a lot of our partner organizations that are going to be sending information out. And what I can do, Jeremy, is send you, these different main resources. So if any of your audience here would like to do something for November for National Epilepsy Awareness Month, that would be good timing for getting information out to your drivers.
Perfect. That is all the questions that we had in the chat. Does anybody have any more, or would you like to unmute yourself and ask Roxanne directly? We did have a question about the slides being available. Yes, we will have a follow-up email to everyone, as well as getting the recording and all the materials onto our website. So all of that will be made available to you, and we will direct you from that follow-up email.
And if you would like more advanced training, the seizure first aid certification course is about a 75-minute online course, and you can become seizure first aid certified for 2 years. So if you're working directly with somebody with epilepsy seizures or transporting them, that is a something nice to share with that person, knowing that you're taking an extra step of being educated for their safety.
Yeah, we've put quite a few links in the chat to what is offered by Epilepsy Foundation. There is a ton of information. There's an entire page on driving and transportation, which is very helpful, including the learning portal information that Roxanne was just talking about. There's a lot of great trainings. We are very, very happy with the amount of attention this webinar had. So thank you to everybody for that. And let us know. We do have a few more minutes. So if there are any questions, please let us know. Roxanne and I and Chelsea will be here for a few more minutes to take those questions. Roxanne, you did get a big thank you. Caitlin said her brother has epilepsy and has never witnessed a seizure, but feels more prepared in case something happens while she's around him.
Well, thank you. And Chelsea's going to email out the post-assessment link, or is she going to post it in the chat box?
Yeah, let me.
Sorry, I forgot to do that.
And if you're having challenges with the epilepsy learning portal, there's the online support as well.
Yep. So yes, there, Chelsea just put the post-assessment information linking you directly to the learning portal. And just a reminder that this is a certification offered by Epilepsy Foundation and not associated with NADTC. So I wanted to make that clear as well. But
Hey, Jeremy, there was one question that came to me in the chat box. Does the Epilepsy Foundation provide support for individuals who might suspect seizures? So, and the neurologist didn't rule out seizures, but they keep happening or not being treated. Yes, you can call our 1-800-332-1000 helpline, and our staff can help direct you to the website, to the National Comprehensive Epilepsy Center. There's a zip code locator where people can type in the zip code, and if they would like to get another opinion, I just say that make sure that that person's insurance covers that. And there's also non-epileptic seizures, psychogenic seizures, and so that's often determined on the epilepsy monitoring unit. So if they have symptoms that look like seizures, but the brainwave data show a normal brainwave reading, then they may be referred. It's now considered a sotiform disorder, conversion disorder, psychiatric issue, but the symptoms visibly look similar. So they have to look at that data. So it can get very complex. Sometimes people have epileptic and non-epileptic seizures, but if they're not getting the help or the answers at wherever they're currently going, then yeah, they can help direct them to other locations for another opinion for sure.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you, Roxanne, and we do appreciate you coming on, taking your time and sharing this information. As mentioned a couple of times, we'll get this out to the group, and certainly direct any questions to myself or Roxanne afterwards. And thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you for the opportunity to educate.
Thank you.